Hi, this is Matt Braynard, Executive Director of Look Ahead America, and I wanted to take a minute today to address a topic that keeps getting brought up to me and people are asking questions about interest in going out and doing ghost voter canvassing. So before I address the topic, I want to share a little bit about my background. I worked for 5 presidential campaigns, including being the Director of Strategy and Data for President Trump's campaign. I served 3 cycles at the Republican National Committee, including the 2000 cycle where I was part of the team to try to identify voter fraud and illegal ballots in Florida, which you may recall it was a very close race that year in that state and very pivotal. I worked on hundreds of campaigns across the country, everything from president down to town council races. I also worked for about a decade as a senior analyst at a firm called Election Data Services, where we were responsible for election administration, going into county, town, and state election offices and helping them fix problems with what district voters were registered in, with the administration of their elections, and with their choice of voting equipment. I ran the Voter Integrity Project in the aftermath of the 2020 general election, which is now part of Look Ahead America, and we're continuing to do our extremely comprehensive research into illegal ballots and taking steps to prevent anything illegal or improper from happening ahead of the 2021 elections in New Jersey, Virginia, and Louisiana, and all of the other pivotal states in 2022. So in the aftermath of 2020, we had a lot of people come into the field interested in trying to identify illegal ballots or voter fraud, many of whom with little to zero campaign experience, political experience, election administrative experience. Just a lot of good intent, a lot of great energy, but really no knowledge or experience with the field at all. And that set them up to fall into a lot of pitfalls. And one of those pitfalls is canvassing for ghost voters. Now, I can tell you that I was actually funded to do ghost voter canvassing in Fulton County, and I did that in December of 2020, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to kind of explain what the problem is with going door to door, knocking on people's houses and asking, if this person lives here, if they ever voted here, etc. And I'm going to just put aside for a moment the fact that the Department of Justice and other federal agencies seem to be eager to crack down on this and prevent people from doing it because they consider it voter intimidation. Putting that aside, as well as putting aside the liability issues and safety issues that come with going to a strange neighborhood, not knowing the people there, but potentially by yourself and knocking on doors and all of the safety risks that come with that. So putting all of that aside, probably the biggest issue with this is that it's a complete waste of volunteer time. This can all be done electronically within an hour or so using various databases. One of the things we pioneered was the use of National Change of Address database to identify illegal ballots that were cast by people who should not have the right to do so because they moved out of state. But many thousands of more we found were people that had moved to a different part of their state or just across the block. And I believe that that is all detectable electronically without having to burn any shoe leather or without having to break a sweat. It's very easy to do that instantly. I could probably, in the state of Florida, identify 250,000 to 500,000 of these records in about an hour. And there are other ways to identify it too, by identifying duplicates within the state's own voter database where somebody was registered, they moved, it showed up as a new voter, the old record's still there, or where they perhaps moved to a different state. So there are other ways to do this electronically very quickly and very efficiently, so it's not a really good use of time. The other reason it's not a great use of volunteer time is because most of the doors you're knocking on, you're not going to get an answer. Or you get an answer, they don't want to talk to you. And in cases where I personally experienced it, sometimes you knock on the door, you ask if a person's ever lived there. They don't know who you are. And maybe they think that person you're asking about, who may be a family member, has some trouble with the law. They're like, no, they don't live there. And that person gets marked as, oops, a ghost voter. No, it's somebody that lives there. They just are fearful or telling something that isn't exactly true to someone, a stranger who answers the door and say that, no, they don't live here when in fact they do. So it's remarkably error-prone. And it's actually not really evidence of fraud. In one other state, and actually really close to where I am right now, there are ghost voter records in my name. I know this because I looked it up. I moved not too long ago, and I updated all my records, but my old record still, for some reason, shows my old address. So if you go there and knock on the door, they'll say, hey, you've never heard of Matt Braynard. Oh, that's a potential voter fraud, that's ghost voter, no. And the method I described earlier for detecting it through national change of address and other methods would have detected that this person did move and where they moved. And it wouldn't have just led to a dead end of knocking on a door and finding, oh, this person doesn't exist. And the person who lives there now would probably tell you, I never heard of this guy. And I've lived here since the 2020 general election. So, oh, obviously, you know, fraud. No, and one of the things that we're running into is that oftentimes what people are identifying or coming up against in terms of what they think is voter fraud is in fact sloppiness in execution of elections. Now, I understand sloppiness is a vein in which fraud could be inserted, where it can take place. It's a place where suspicion of fraud can take place. And something definitely needs to be done to take care of these voters who don't live at these addresses anymore. The thing is, though, if you're going to go to the state, the Secretary of State's office, the state election board, and say, hey, change these because this person doesn't live here anymore, you need to update this record or at least do your own follow-up. A door-to-door person knocking and maybe coming up with, I don't know, a couple hundred or so over months, those responses they get, even of the people who tell them that, hey, that person doesn't live here anymore, isn't really a reliable record to take the state. What is a reliable record, and what Look Ahead America is going to be delivering to many of these states, is that national change of address database match, where you match the people who've moved per the U.S. Postal Service database, which everyone fills out the card, to the existing voter database. You positively identify them. Not only do you identify them, but now you know where they live currently. The state is going to find that much more reliable than some door-to-door effort by volunteers who just say, yeah, this person doesn't live here anymore. Oh yeah, the state's not going to take that seriously. And besides, with the NCOA match, the state can do that themselves. And in some cases they do. In some cases they can, but they don't. But if we show them hundreds of thousands of records that are no longer accurate, we put public pressure on them, then they're more likely to run their own NCOA analysis and get rid of all of these bad records in the voter file. So let me talk to you about my Fulton County experience, because I think the lesson there is very important. There was a donor who very much wanted this done, and as part of the voter integrity project, I said, okay, we'll do this. We'll run this program for a week. We identified some very dense populated counties, dense populated neighborhoods in Fulton County. We went door to door with people who had not voted before, or they were recently registered and had just voted in 2020. And I can tell you, I was knocking on doors, asking, hey, do you live here, or does this person live here, on the guise of asking these new voters, hey, are there any things that can be done to improve the election process? So we weren't even blatantly saying, hey, are you real? We're suspicious this is voter fraud. No, our questions were like, hey, you're a newly registered voter. We saw you registered for the first time and cast a ballot recently. Are there any suggestions that we can share with the state in terms of making voting easier for you? So people were very willing to talk to us, and I found that over and over again, with virtually no exception, those people were real. I looked them in the eye, I shook their hands, and they were real. And they had been registered by Stacey Abrams and her operation. They had been turned out to vote and educated on who to vote for, or who they think they should vote for, by Stacey Abrams and her operation. So the lesson here is that rather than chasing ghosts, the left spent the last 4 years registering their voters in the progressive centers of this country. And when it comes to productive use of volunteer time, that is far more productive than randomly knocking on doors trying to discover voter fraud in an effort that does not yield anything, cannot yield anything to the state, and is insanely inefficient compared to our own methods that LA is going to be deploying to identify hundreds of thousands of these cases and turn them over to the state, which will take maybe an hour or two with our processor or data vendor. Then, gosh, I don't know how many volunteer hours you need to do that, if that's even possible in a state of significant size. So it's really just about getting all these people who are enthusiastic about something to get engaged with something productive. And what is that? That is community organizing. That is fighting on your local level, at the school board level, to oppose CRT or to change to open source voting equipment. It means fighting on the state level for election integrity, educating your state legislators on the changes they can make that will avoid many of the problems we observed with the 2020 general election. And on the national level, getting involved with national engagement, like fighting for justice for the January 6th patriots who are now being held as political prisoners. And you can do all of that as volunteers for Look Ahead America. So sign up on our website, lookaheadamerica.org, and click volunteer. And besides those tasks that I just described, probably the most important thing we can do is register new voters. So if you're interested in going door to door or getting publicly interactive, dealing with people, we have a database of thousands, hundreds of thousands in some states, patriotic Americans who are not registered to vote, and we need somebody to go out, find them, and bring them home. Bring them home to voting, bring them home to voting with us. Get them educated and get them to turn out to vote and make them understand that their vote really matters. So again, I encourage you to please volunteer with Look Ahead America. We will put you to work. My name is Matt Braynard, Executive Director of Look Ahead America. America first, America forever.